I was asked to discuss the balancing of business and academics in today's intercollegiate sports landscape, which to me translates, how do we maintain the balance between commercialism, or as you will see later, what I prefer to call it revenue production, and the mission of higher education in which collegiate athletics in this country uniquely operates. To answer that question, it's important to understand that we must put revenue production in some sort of perspective. So to do that, it's important to understand the context in which we work and what an intercollegiate athletics conference is and what our responsibilities are. The SEC, the Southeastern Conference, is a group of 12 institutions of higher learning located in our 9-state region in the southeastern part of the United States. These institutions came together 76 years ago for the purpose of engaging in intercollegiate athletics competition, agreeing to be governed by a constitution and bylaws. In other words, each being willing to give up relevant authority to a central administration pursuant to the old adage we were all taught in geometry class, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The conference is staffed by 25 experienced professionals like David Knight and Charles Bloom, Associate Commissioner, who's here with us today. And it's governed by the presidents and chancellors of our 12-member institutions. And I can't emphasize that enough. For example, my contract is with the presidents and chancellors to whom I report. And I think that's a very relevant fact as we go through today's discussion, because what we have before us in this cultural phenomenon of intercollegiate athletics in the American model is a sensitive balancing of the academic mission and the culture of intercollegiate athletic competition. They work very closely with our athletic directors, Jeff Long being a very important part of the 12 athletic directors that work with the presidents and chancellors and with me. But the day-to-day responsibility of the conference falls to the commissioner, whoever sits in my seat. And my role is multifaceted. At times I'm an advocate, a negotiator, a mediator, a judge, a legislator, a shoulder to lean on, a communicator, an author, a referee, a spokesman, and sometimes a target, especially when it comes to football officiating. But to keep the revenue production in perspective, I want to talk about the role of the conference in its entirety. And it covers a wide spectrum of activities, including athletic competition, academics, rules and regulations, compliance, media relations, and revenue production. In the area of athletics competition, we are responsible for administering 19 championships in 20 sports for both men and women. We develop regulations that govern each sport. We administer the officiating program, we work with bowl associations, we schedule games, we work with coaches. And we work with national organizations such as the NCAA and the Bowl Championship Series. In the area of academics, we assist our institutions in complying with NCAA academic requirements for initial and continuing eligibility of student athletes. We work with the SEC's academic consortium that Mark talked about that serves as a forum for emphasizing the importance of academic success and graduation to our student athletes, and we continue to use the bully pulpit to remind people when the color and the pageantry takes all of our attention that at the bottom line we are dealing with students who we want to educate and who we want to graduate. And let me digress for 1 second because I'm extremely proud of the academic consortium that Mark mentioned. And I'm extremely proud of the University of Arkansas. When we developed this consortium, which in short is a parallel organization to the athletic function, it's our 12 universities who have come together for purposes of enjoying and sharing the research and teaching of all 12 of our institutions. It has nothing to do with athletics. And its board are the provosts of our member institutions. And this is an opportunity for our students. The dream that started it was that if a student at the University of Arkansas wanted to take a course at South Carolina or at Alabama or at LSU, because that program was a program of emphasis at that institution, that could be done easily and without a lot of red tape. Same for a faculty member, that if you're a faculty member in the SEC at one school, you're a faculty member in the SEC. That's our dream. And we've already started it with students abroad, leadership programs. But when it came time to figure out where to house it, the University of Arkansas stepped forward. And if you go down by the stadium, you'll see the building that's the home of the SEC Academic Consortium. It's housed here at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, and it's a full-time staff and full-time executive director, and working towards the development of another SEC, an SEC that deals solely with academics. In terms of rules and regulations, the conference assists our institutions in navigating the complex and voluminous rules and regulations that govern intercollegiate athletics by providing interpretations and guidelines to ensure compliance. And we assist our institutions when we stub our toe and find ourselves facing violations of NCAA rules and regulations. One of the things I'm most proud of is that when we came to the league back in 2002, we had a majority of our schools somewhere in the NCAA infractions pipeline. That was really a very difficult problem for us and was keeping us from becoming the best that we could be. And I'm pleased to report to you now that that matter is really a secondary matter for us, that there's been a cultural change due to the support of our presidents and our athletic directors, and we have no longer is that an issue on a day-to-day basis as it was when we came. So that's the context of some of the things we do as we come to the requirement of and the responsibility for supplementing the revenue that our institutions develop so that we can support the kind of programs that we want to have. So we're responsible for providing revenue to our institutions from television, from satellite radio, the digital world, corporate sponsorships, championships, and bowls. Last year, we distributed over $132 million to our institutions to supplement the athletics revenue generated by our athletic directors and their staffs through ticket sales and corporate sponsorships and fundraising. So the purpose of outlining all of this is to give you some context of our overall role and the importance of resolving issues off the field as well as on the field in order to maximize our potential and to retain our position as one of the preeminent conferences in the country. At the same time, it's important to clarify that revenue production, as it pertains to intercollegiate athletics, is different from revenue production in the world of business. And so I don't use the term business. I reserve the term business for a corporation that produces revenue that flows to owners and to investors for their own personal private use. In intercollegiate athletics, the revenue flows to programs for the benefit of the student athletes consistent with the educational mission of our institutions. So when I speak about the role of the conference in revenue production, it is revenue generated for member institutions to assist them in supporting their broad-based athletics programs for men and women, consistent with the American collegiate model of athletics, which is unique in the world. There are almost 5,000 student athletes who participate in intercollegiate athletics in our competition every year. We seem to focus on football and basketball, but one of the great attributes of this league is the fact that we have almost 5,000 student athletes, men and women, who compete in a lot of different sports. And that's the way it should be, because if you believe in the educational value of competition, it doesn't matter whether you're playing football or soccer or basketball or softball. These 5,000 student athletes receive from our athletic departments and our institutions over $70 million a year in financial aid to support their efforts to get a degree. And this revenue, as I said earlier, is generated from television, radio, conference championships, bowl games, the NCAA men's basketball tournament, and new media. The other hallmark of the SEC is that the revenue is attributed equally to the 12 member institutions, with relatively few exceptions. So it doesn't matter how good, whether you're having a great year or not such a great year athletically, because that's consistent with the hallmark of a great league, that we share competition, but we also share equally in any of the revenue that is in fact produced. I'm not going to dwell on each one of the sources of revenue, but since my remarks were billed as revenue, and I'm going to talk about television in a minute, but the conference has also gone ahead and negotiated for the league. If you listen to XM or Sirius satellite radio in your car, that was a contract that was negotiated by the conference for our member institutions. Our conference championships, whether it be football or any other sport, are obviously opportunities for us to develop revenue for our institutions. Bowl games, we have 9 bowl tie-ins. We're in the middle of negotiations for the next 4 years. Between the BCS and bowl games, and not only the opportunity to compete, but it is obviously a significant source of revenue for our member institutions. The NCAA men's basketball tournament, if you go to postseason, you get in the tournament, there's a formula for providing their units, and the units have a value, and each time you play, you get a unit, and the unit lasts for 6 years. So when you think about how many teams we've had in the postseason, and every time you play, you get a unit that's worth a lot of money, and you multiply that by 6. I'm not very good in math, but it's a pretty big number. And that's money that we share equally. We share equally. And finally, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the new world, the media, what we call the digital world, and our efforts to try to understand that world, identify with that world, not knowing whether that world has anything in terms of compensation in the future, but understanding that it might. So trying to protect our assets for my successor and my successor's successor. Over the past year, there has been much written about the conference's historic 15-year television agreements with CBS and ESPN. As Mark said, we are now the most widely distributed conference in the country on multiple platforms, and it does provide substantial revenue. Mark gave you a number. We've never confirmed it, but we do believe it's somewhat robust, and we're glad for that. ESPN alone is committed to televise 5,500 events over 15 years, and that's an average of about 366 events a year. And that relates to football and basketball and all of our Olympic sports. It relates to weekly magazine shows, academic shows, and a lot of other different things. So to give you a sense of the reach of these agreements, this fall when we began, every single football game's on television. It's on CBS or ESPN or on one of our 2 regional networks, Comcast and Fox. And for those of you who like to watch football in the morning, we have the SEC network. But I want to pause for a minute, because the SEC network is a very interesting part of the evolution of what we were trying to accomplish. Prior to this year, if you were on in the early window, the old Raycom window, you may remember, Jefferson Pilot window, those games were limited to our 9-state region. Now, on the SEC network, Now, these are games that are syndicated. Syndicated means it's not on cable. It goes over the air, and if you had rabbit ears, you could get it on your TV. So it's like CBS. It's over the air. You may get it through cable, but it's broadcast over the air and available to everyone. That network now reaches 83 television markets and 72 million homes, representing 63% of the country. So on football Saturdays, the early window, the SEC network becomes ESPN's third most widely distributed platform, behind only ESPN and ESPN2, and they're in about 98 million. Those networks are in somewhere near 98 million homes. So that's, in a sense, that's what we're talking about by being widely distributed. But the catalyst or the genesis of that discussion came from our presidents and chancellors about outreach. How do we continue to provide outreach for our institutions in other parts of the country, because they're interested in enrollment management. They're interested in finding good students everywhere in the country to come and populate our institutions in that percentage that we're permitted to have students from outside of the state in which the institution resides. And you'll see that network is prominently branded SEC. You will also see, if you watch ESPN games and CBS games, that it's the SEC on CBS or it's the SEC on ESPN, and you don't see that from any other conference, because we're trying to uniquely position us as a conference that will attract not only great athletes, but great students to come to our institutions from all over the country and all over the world. In developing these contracts in relative to revenue production, we also secured the copyrights for our past and future games, which means that allowed us to create what has now become the SEC Digital Network and the SEC Academic Network. If you're familiar with ESPN360.com, or what we call the 360 technology, part of our agreement was that we would get that technology and create an SEC academic network. So if you can go to our website as a portal, click on the SEC academic network, and if you're interested in what Arkansas is doing academically, all you have to do is click on the picture that says Arkansas, and there are 5 different videos created by the university, nothing to do with athletics, created by the University of Arkansas, about programs, people, events, things that are happening at the University of Arkansas. And at any given moment, there'll be 5 different videos that you can look at. And so therefore, there's a window to the university that goes throughout the world that has nothing to do with sports. It's part of our agreement with ESPN to get that technology. We've implemented it, and it's now in place. At the same time, all of us wonder about new media. What is it going to look like? We're all aware of the significant transition in the world of communications and in the world of technology. And so in securing our copyright and the ability to utilize our assets, we created an SEC digital network. So if you go to our website as a portal, you can go on our digital network. And what you can see there is, if you're a fan of any sport, you can see whatever you want to see anytime you want to see it with regard to on the conference. But it's uncharted territory. What's interesting about that is that we obviously had some discussions with our friends in the media about a credential, about who has what rights, and worked our way through that, I think, fairly well. But the important question here was, and it's a question that I think the media is dealing with, the traditional print media, the electronic media, institutions and organizations that own assets, the world is going to continue to develop. For example, as part of our digital network, we have an app, SEC app, sports app on your iPhone. It was a matter of weeks before that sports app became the second most popular sports app on the iPhone, and our folks tell us the 34th most popular app at that particular moment. And I guess there are thousands or hundreds of apps. I don't know how many there are. But that tells you of the enormous interest. If you've never heard of a WAP is a website that can be put on a telephone, a mobile device. So we're now in the process of developing a WAP to go along with everything else, and all of that means that somewhere, someday, those assets may play an important role in the future. So our goal here was not to create controversy, but to find a way to protect the conference so that someday, way down the road, it'll be long after I'm gone, that if there was something to be of value, that it would be there for our institutions to have. Again, it's important to reference the difference in revenue defined within the context of intercollegiate athletics, where the revenue flows to programs for the benefit of student athletes consistent with the educational mission of our institutions. There is a long cultural history of how we come to find ourselves in this somewhat paradoxical situation. In this country, athletic competition has been part of higher education since the late 1800s, based on the premise that there is educational value in athletic competition so long as it stays within the mission of our institutions. 1852, Harvard and Yale decided to row against each other. Somebody decided that people might want to watch it and build some stands and charge 50 cents. Guess what? Things haven't changed. Here we are. It's not 50 cents, but the concept is the same. 1859, Princeton went to Rutgers, or Rutgers went to Princeton, and they played a football game, the first intercollegiate football game, and somebody paid some amount of money to watch the game. The American model is unique. Nowhere else in the world is athletic competition enmeshed in higher education as it is here in the American collegiate model. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does require a balance. And sometimes the balance is difficult to maintain, but we do the best we can. As the late president of the NCAA, Dr. Miles Brand, articulated forcefully, there is nothing to be ashamed of in engaging in commercial activity if it is balanced and the revenue is used to support sports that cannot support themselves. Recently, the NCAA appointed a task force on commercial activity to consider how to maintain a balance between the need to generate revenue from commercial sources in support of athletic activity within the context of higher education. In the report, the task force wrote, I quote, "In short, the task at hand, as media platforms broaden and as institutions reach further beyond the campus for new revenue opportunities, is to align the commercial activity associated with intercollegiate athletics with the rest of higher education and to find the appropriate and reciprocal relationship with corporate America so that both benefit in accordance with their shared values. A broadening in the relationship between higher education, intercollegiate athletics, and commercial entities is not necessarily an issue for concern if the relationship respects the primacy of collegiate athletics as student athletes and students, is reciprocal in nature, and the values of higher education are not abridged." Ladies and gentlemen, we do what we do because we believe in the intrinsic values taught by intercollegiate athletics, such as sportsmanship, sacrifice, teamwork, learning to deal with failure, learning to deal with success, understanding what dedication and commitment requires, and maybe most importantly, how to persevere through heartbreak and disappointment. We do what we do because we believe deeply in the enterprise of intercollegiate athletics as a vehicle for instilling these values in our student athletes, values that go hand in hand with academic achievement. Just think of the courage it takes to stand under a punt with 100,000 people screaming, with people weighing 200 to 300 pounds pounding down. What does that take? And then you fumble a punt. And it's, our games go to 8 to 10 million people. What does it take to wake up the next morning? Maybe you lost a game because of that. What does it take? What does it teach? How do you keep it in perspective? You don't unless you keep it in the context of education, unless you keep it in the context of the mission of what we are trying to do. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 75th anniversary by paying tribute to the SEC student-athlete experience. This is not about money. This is about what we do and why we do it. This was a tribute to many of our former student-athletes who have benefited from athletic competition by applying the lessons of competition to life after sport. This, ladies and gentlemen, is, continues, and must be our greatest legacy as a conference. I quote from the foreword in the book published to celebrate this occasion, entitled Stories of Character. These are the student-athletes who embody the character of the SEC. It is a character that defies statistics and box scores, yet is measured by the profound impact these men and women have made beyond the arenas of competition in the classroom and within their communities and on mankind. The important question for the conference is not about bylaw 1054, and it's not about fines and arguing about officiating. The important question for the conference is, what can we do to ensure that this legacy lives on? So when our successors celebrate our centennial anniversary, they will look back with pride and say that we preserve the mission of the conference, that our student-athletes continue to compete at the highest levels of intercollegiate competition, perform in the classroom, graduate, and go on to live happy, successful, and productive lives, applying what they learned during their time at our institutions, both on the playing fields and in the classroom. Our challenge in the midst of all, as Grantland Rice said, in the midst of all the tumult and the shouting, our challenge is to ensure that legacy, the marriage of education in the classroom and the education derived from athletic competition, to continue to enrich the lives of our student-athletes. Our ability to generate revenue and redistribute that revenue to our institutions helps us ensure this legacy. We are enhancing and protecting opportunities for student-athletes. The role of revenue production, as I said before, is unique. Nowhere else in the world is amateur sport woven into the fabric of higher education. We strive every single day to protect this unique marriage of education and athletic competition. We strive to protect that balance because that is our goal and that is our legacy for tomorrow. Thank you.
We now have some time for some questions. And if you will raise your hand and please wait for the microphone to get to you. All
right. One question I had, I know it's University of Tennessee System's possibly going to be laying off some employees from an article earlier in the week. And I guess my question is, with the revenue streams in the SEC, how is there ways for that to address that problem?
I don't know if it can be addressed in the larger sense, but one of the things that we're very pleased about is that I think every one of our institutions, as far as I know, has every one of our athletic department, our ADs sat with our presidents at every one of our institutions and have agreed upon an amount that comes from this revenue source to be used by the institution on the academic side. Now, how it gets used and to whom is the beneficiary of that particular money, I'm not sure. But it's certainly, the first thing our presidents did when we thought we might have a chance to successfully complete these negotiations was to sit down and talk about the importance of making sure that some of this revenue found its way into, for lack of a better term, the academic side of our institutions. You know, clearly not enough to address some of the very difficult issues that this recession has created for all of, I mean, none of us are immune from it. We were fortunate enough to complete our negotiations just before it hit, but that doesn't mean that we're not, you know, we're not all immune. And I think if you talk with all of our athletic directors, they will tell you that, notwithstanding the supplemental revenue, that there are issues ahead. And unless this recession, you know, I mean, we're not immune, but it's been softened by our ability to supplement revenue. But if it doesn't let up and over the long term, then we'll all be in the same boat. Thank you.
Question back there.
A recent study, which I'm sure you're familiar with, showed that only 21% of Division I athletic programs were profitable. And of that profitability, 30% of that roughly came from donations from boosters and you know, just people giving donations. I know you can't be responsible for all of Division I athletics, but in terms of those numbers, do those seem in line with, you know, that balance that you're talking about?
You know, the balance that I think I've been talking about is to make sure that we keep the athletic mission inside of the educational mission. But your point is well taken. I think that there is an issue of concern. And now taking off my SEC hat and just observing, as I think you've asked, about, you know, looking at the larger picture. Obviously, the data shows that many institutions, the expense side of the ledger, it continues to grow at a rate greater than the growth of the non-athletic side of the house. You know, there have been new and available revenue sources on the athletic side that help offset that. But there is and will be a ceiling. So there's no question that in terms of, it doesn't matter where you are. You know, we may be in a more fortunate position than others, but there's no doubt that and Dr. Brand, the late Dr. Brand, was very articulate and very concerned about the ever-increasing cost, the ever-increasing, you know, issues that relate to the growth of athletics, as well as the rate of growth of our institutions. So I think the answer is, there a concern? Yes. I think we talk about it regularly with our presidents and with our athletic directors, and thus far, at least in the SEC, as far as I can tell, there has been and remains some pretty significant fiscal responsibility where the athletic department as it relates to the institutions.
Questions? Got a question right behind you, here with a Clinton School student right there.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel, and I'm a student here at the Clinton School. I want to thank you, Mr. Slive, for coming and speaking with us today.
You're welcome.
My question, or the topic that I want to raise, can be summed up by a sentiment that a friend of mine raised with me. He said that the lack of a college football playoff is truly the only thing that prevents college football from being the perfect sport. And I want to ask for your response to the frustration that I think a lot of college football fans feel about what they perceive as the stranglehold that the bowl system has on postseason college football play, and what they view a much fairer system would be is a college football playoff. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the respect with which the question has been asked, because in most venues I go to, it isn't asked quite that nicely. And my name changes on occasion from Mike to something else that I don't dare repeat in this room. Oh, well. You have to invite me back, and we'll because I could spend a half an hour talking about it. let me start out by saying, you know, as I'm a recovering lawyer, and I want to give attribution to Lester Munson, a sports writer, who said that, because I don't want to be plagiarizing. But so by saying that, reasonable people can differ on this issue, clearly. I have not been in favor, personally, I have not been in favor of a playoff in my seat as the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. But I have been, to some degree, an advocate for a so-called modification that's become known as the +1, where you would have one more game, and the winner, the top 4 teams, would go to bowls, and then they would play, and then the winners of that game would play for the national championship. But that was not met with any favor whatsoever amongst my colleagues. The 3 reasons that I usually give for not being in favor of a playoff are: 1, football, and college football enjoys the most popular regular season of any sport. Last year we drew 6.7 million people to our games, and this year we're on track to do as well or more. And in our culture in the Southeast, you know, regular season Saturdays are a way of life. And it's generational. It goes from grandma to grandpa to mom and dad to the kids, and then mom and dad become grandma and grand. It just continues. So we have this wonderful regular season where every Saturday everybody's heart's in their mouth about what's going to happen. I respect the academic calendar. We have exams in December. So if you notice, we don't play our bowl games till very late, because there's games in December. We want to keep football a one-semester sport. The pressure on our kids, as you can see, for being available and playing is pretty significant. And we don't want them to start 2 weeks, you know, if you're playing for a championship, you're not going to have a minute, and you're going to be deep into the second semester. Thirdly, you know, we do like the bowl system. I think stranglehold is a little stronger than a word I would use. But you know, Jeff and I were talking on the way over here, and we have an opportunity to send 9 teams to postseason. That's about 1,000 young men who get a chance to go do something that they otherwise would not have done. You can argue every one of those, and you can argue it persuasively. But the generation of people who will make these decisions, and it's, you know, the commissioners get the credit or the blame, but the reality is it's not just us. We reflect, you know, no commissioner says anything or does anything if he wants to keep his job, if it doesn't reflect the sense of his conference and his presidents. So the current generation of leadership, you know, is not interested in moving to a playoff. Now, I would tell you this: if you went to a playoff, it probably has to be a 16-team playoff. For example, you might take the champions of all 11 leagues and 5 at-larges. And then, you know, if you're Arkansas and you're in the and you've you know, you're going to play the champion of the MAC, and you're going to play in Toledo. You might have to play all over the place. And if you're an Arkansas fan, are you going to go to that game, or are you going to wait to see if Arkansas wins, and maybe you'll go? But if they win the second game, you know, there are lots and lots of issues. So we've just signed an agreement with ESPN for the next 4-year cycle. The next 4-year cycle will be the same format we have now, but we have said publicly that, and privately, that we will have pretty significant conversations during the next 4-year cycle. You know, what's out there long term, I don't know. But you raised the right question. It's something that people are interested and concerned about. We have won the national championship the last 3 years in a row. This is my 8th season, my first 7. We've won it 4. We've won it 5 in X number of years. So, you know, we had it in 2004 when Auburn was undefeated. That was rough. They didn't get there, so I didn't like it that year as much as I liked it the last 3 years. So I hope I did an attempt to answer your question. You're welcome.
Question. One right here.
You alluded briefly to the infractions when you came into the league.
Yes, sir.
And I travel a lot, and a lot of clients say what an outlaw league we were then, so I commend you on your zero tolerance policy in that regard.
Thank you.
Helped the image tremendously. Currently, I think your actions are going against the image of the league around the country, that we're doing whatever necessary to keep our top 2 teams undefeated in the playoff game. How does that go with your balancing the perception of we aren't going to criticize after the game with having an apparent bias toward the favored teams getting in that championship game undefeated?
Well, first of all, I don't accept the premise of your question that there's any kind of bias or any kind of conspiracy. I think that takes these issues out to a place that really don't make any sense. The question is, when you have, first of all, I'll tell you that I believe we have very, very good officiating, and I think anybody who's in the business would tell you that it's as good as anywhere there is. The problem we have is when there's an error, oftentimes it gets extrapolated easily to the concept of whether the officiating is good or not good. We have a rule about not speaking out against or about officiating, criticizing our officials. It's a rule that every single league has in the country. And it's a rule that I think every professional league has in the country. Am I happy about this? Is it difficult? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. We let people know that we hold officials accountable when they make mistakes by suspending the crew that we did. So I think if there's any question about our accountability, when we don't speak out, I think what we've shown is that we hold officials accountable. In any given instance, we evaluate it, we look at it, the channels of communication are open between the institutions and the conference office. And for example, last weekend the channels were open, the conversations took place between the LSU and the conference office, and we hold people accountable. We do that. And that's the policy that we've had in place. There was an exception when we suspended and announced it because there was such a confluence of events at that particular time. One of the reasons I try to talk about context is for that very reason, that the more people that understand the full context of what a conference does and the fact that we do so many good things and some officiating issues, I have to try to keep those in perspective. If you had a problem or an issue or perception in your company, what you do is when the things settle down, you sit down and you evaluate it. We will evaluate our officiating program from stem to stern. We'll make sure that we have every bit top-flight technology. Every year, officials don't return to our league after we evaluate them. We will continue to make sure that we're providing the best possible training to our officials. We don't have time to go through our whole training program.
We've got time for one more question right over here. Yes, sir. Let's go right over here. Wait for the microphone, please.
Mike, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask that when Arkansas wins the national championship ball game, how is that money distributed? You said it's distributed throughout the conference. Does the winner get a bigger share and then it's distributed out?
It's shared mostly equally, but in our bowls revenue distribution, we provide for the team that plays in a particular bowl to retain. They obviously have expenses as well, so they retain more than just the share that they would get, and then they share in it like everybody else does. So notwithstanding the fact that a BCS bowl might pay something like $18 million, that's a long way from what the institution gets for playing in that game.